From Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio, this is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman. And as usual, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to my show. I realize some of these episodes are really long, but they're long because we're going in depth with my admissions guests about their schools and admissions processes, which I feel is so important for you to hear, so I'm hesitant to cut out information or trim them down. You can always listen to as much as you can, and then come back later to finish it up. I'm always gathering listener questions to discuss with my guests, so if you have a question, please email me at allaccess@case.edu. It's just that easy. Speaking of listener questions, today we're going to be answering questions about a really popular topic, and that's master's programs versus special master's programs versus post-bacc programs. So you'll want to stick around to hear us share our thoughts on this topic. Now, by now, you know that today I'm featuring Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine. And you may be thinking, another med school in Chicago? I hear ya, I know, but hear me out. One, there are a bunch of med schools in Chicago. And two, I have to bring you the guests that are available to come on the show. So it just so happens that in the last 3 episodes, the most available people have been my friends in Chicago. So rest assured, I have some other med schools coming down the road, particularly on the West Coast. Finally, right? I'm talking to you, California and Washington, so hang in there. They're coming. Finally, I want to give a big hello to some applicants that I've been meeting on interview days here at our medical school that tell me they're regular listeners, which is embarrassingly flattering to me. So to Fook in Atlanta, Ricky in Portland, Anjali in Palo Alto, Mike and Tay in Dallas, Andrew in New Jersey, thanks again for telling your friends about the show and taking time to listen to it. I really, really appreciate it. All right. Before I tell you about my guest today, let me give you some background on the school you're going to be hearing about today. The Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine is located in Maywood, Illinois, which is about 12 miles east of downtown Chicago. The medical school is a part of the Loyola University Chicago that was founded by Jesuits in 1870 and is one of the largest Catholic universities in the United States. The medical school got its start in the early 1900s and then was formally named the Stritch School of Medicine in 1948. They're now attached to the Loyola University Medical Center, which is a level 1 trauma center. They have training partnerships with approximately 80, that's 80, affiliate hospitals and clinics in the Chicago area where medical students train, including Cook County Health System and the adjacent Hines VA Hospital. Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine is committed to scholarship and the education of medical professionals and biomedical scientists. The faculty, staff, and students at their school are called to go beyond facts, experimentation, and treatment of disease to prepare people to lead extraordinary lives and treat the human spirit in an environment that encourages innovation, embraces diversity, respects life, and values human dignity. Stritch seeks to recruit and enroll students in full alignment with their Jesuit values, which are care for the whole person, education in the service of social justice, and reverence and respect for the community. They seek academically prepared candidates with significant and sustained service and community engagement, academic preparation, achievement, and curiosity, leadership and inspiration for change, and commitment and personal ethic for social justice and service, specifically to the underserved. Stritch is a private institution and accepts applicants from the DACA status and applicants from Canada on a case-by-case basis, but not international applicants. Additionally, there is not a state residency requirement. For the entering class of 2019, the medical school received 14,905 applications and interviewed 680 applicants for a class size of 170. 62% of their 2019 entering class were comprised of women, and 15% self-described as underrepresented in medicine. My guest today that's going to be giving us more insight into Stritch is Mr. Daryl Neighbors, the Assistant Dean for Admissions and Recruitment. Daryl has an eclectic background in banking, teaching, and secondary school administration, which we get into a little more detail during our discussion. He began his first admissions and financial aid position in 2002. Then in 2005, he came to Chicago to work for the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine. Daryl has embarked upon roles in directing admissions, financial aid, and offices of diversity for the past 14 years. He began his journey with Loyola in 2015. At Stritch, Daryl has worked to improve and streamline a systems-based admissions process that uniquely expands the participation of faculty, staff, and students in the holistic review and consideration of medical school applicants. He's also a staff advisor for the Society for the Advancement of Chicano and Native American Student Organization and provides curriculum and teaching support for the Aspire program. Finally, and probably most importantly, Daryl has advised a generation of students applying to undergraduate, medical, and graduate school programs across the country, and I really believe you're going to enjoy hearing from him during this conversation today. So, let's get after it with Daryl and the Stritch School of Medicine. Well, hey, Daryl, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited that we're finally able to work out a time to get you on here. So welcome to All Access.
Thanks for having me, Christian. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is actually now, I think, the second episode I've had from people in Chicago, but there's 8 medical schools there. So it's hard to ignore all the schools there in Chicago. So I feel like we've been on a Chicago theme lately. You've been in admissions for a while. And so I'm always trying to let listeners know kind of where you're coming from. Where was the draw that pulled you into a career in admissions?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't believe I had it on my radar when I graduated from undergrad. As a matter of fact, I applied to law school, deferred my seat for 2 years.
No kidding.
And thought about, going into law, but at some point decided that it wasn't for me. I was in that 2 years, I tried to get into acting. I was working in Hollywood. I went to school in Southern California and lived in Hollywood for 2 years and tried to explore the range of opportunities. I was an extra in several films and music videos back when those were popular.
No kidding.
Yeah, I was an assistant dresser and part of a running crew for a play that was actually at the Tiffany Theater in Hollywood, which is no longer there. Lots of things have changed about Hollywood in the past 30 years. But yeah, that play ran for about a year and a half. It was called Ida, and it was about a couple dealing with Alzheimer's and their children who were trying to help them navigate their futures as a couple. And so it was a nice story, but long story short, I did that and went back to my hometown of Houston, Texas, where my mother was vice president of a bank, and she said, "Well, you need to work, so why don't you come work at the bank?" And so I ended up working in a bank as a consumer credit operations analyst, and didn't really find that to be too interesting. Mm-hmm. Again, I thought about law at that point, but then I can remember very vividly one day going into the break room and looking at the Houston Chronicle, which was the local newspaper, and there was an advertisement for teachers. There was a teacher shortage in the city of Houston. And it encouraged people with college degrees who were looking for a challenge, looking for adventure. Almost like one of those old Army slogans and those old Army advertisements.
We want you.
Right, exactly. And but it laid out a plan where you could receive your teaching credential in a year, and you could be fast tracked. They would put you into classes once they gave you a background and some coursework, and then you could choose your discipline, and then you can get your credential in a year. And I was like, well, this might be for me. And so I went into that and never looked back. I ended up teaching for about 10 years, got my credential in Texas, and went to California with my then girlfriend, now wife, who did Teach for America, which was a similar program that overlapped with the program I was in. And from there, I taught, and I taught in public schools for most of that time. My last iteration of teaching was in a private school in Berkeley. And it was a very interesting environment. I decided to go back to school. I did not decide to go to law school. I went, and again, it was in the Bay Area, so there was a lot of buzz around e-commerce and web technology. So I decided to get a degree in an integrated business and electronic business systems discipline, which I felt would set me up pretty well for work in the tech world. And again, I just, it was just sort of like happened, just a chance occurrence that a friend of mine told me about a job at the Athenian School, which is in Danville, California, and they were looking for an associate director of admissions. And I said, well, what is that? And, they described the job as being one that would, work with, marketing and trying to integrate an electronic process where it was a very paper heavy process at that point. And also, recruiting overseas, because it was a boarding and a day school. So there was the opportunity to travel to Southeast Asia. There was the opportunity to put my new skills to work. And of course, there was also the opportunity to not depart too far from what I was comfortable with, which was education. So I interviewed for the job, and next thing you know, I was associate director of admissions and financial aid at the Athenian School in Danville, California. And that's kind of where it started. I took my family to Seattle from that point. My wife didn't like the fact that it rained 70% of the year.
Okay.
So, from that point, I sort of thought about, well, where are we going to go? And she's from Ohio. And so we started looking in the Midwest, and lo and behold, we found that the most progressive and really economically viable city was Chicago. And, so I threw my hat in the ring. I applied to a few schools. I really had no idea what the University of Chicago was. And then my wife says, oh, I applied there and got in, but decided to go to Villanova. She said, if you get a job there, it's almost like it's like fate, like come full circle.
Yeah.
So no pressure, right? So I applied and, I interviewed in the middle of January. It was like 3 degrees below zero. I said, what am I doing here? Yeah. But they hired me. And so I started there as an admissions and financial aid analyst, and over 10 years, achieved the goal of becoming director of admissions and then director of multicultural affairs. And that was my first iteration of working in a medical school, my first iteration of working in a higher level graduate professional environment. Learned a great deal, had some great mentors there. Couldn't have asked for a better environment to learn how to do this work. Yeah. So that's ultimately how I got to Stritch.
That's crazy.
By virtue of working there and the connections that I made. Like you said, there's a lot of medical schools in Chicago, and there's a lot of overlap among all of us who work in these environments in terms of conferencing and networking and obviously working with students. So
I want to go back to one thing though. Can you tell us what music video you may have been in?
I was in a Keith Sweat video.
No way.
It was called "Do Me Baby," which I wouldn't recommend. But
that's a popular. That was one of the biggest songs.
Yeah, it was.
You were in that video.
I was in the video, but you can't see my head.
Oh,
I'm in a scene that's supposed to be depicting a scene from the movie The Hustler.
Oh
so
my
Keith
gosh.
Sweat is like the Paul Newman character where he's playing pool, and I'm standing next to him while he's seated in the chair, being like, the king of pool, whatever. And so that got me in a nice suit. They cut my hair,
and they didn't show your face.
Well, and they just completely cut my head off. But I think the bigger claim to fame from that era was, and I just actually found the clip 35 minutes into a very, very bad movie called Cutting Class, which is interestingly Brad Pitt's first film. 35 minutes into the movie, you can see me. I'm sitting behind the actor who plays his father and another actor who plays a scout, a college basketball scout. And I am yelling and encouraging mayhem on the basketball court. So that is my ultimate claim.
There's your fame.
Yeah, that's it. My literally less than 1 minute.
Oh, unfortunately, did it lead to a star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame or not yet?
Well, I got a free lunch out. Like I said, I got a free lunch and all these things. But the Keith Sweat video, actually, I got to keep the haircut. So,
oh my gosh, isn't that crazy? How that's where you didn't go to school anticipating to be an admissions dean. Neither did you go to school to be in a music video. But isn't it crazy how life works? Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, it really is.
You can't make it up.
Yep. So you've been in admissions for a while now. We've established that, and a really interesting road to get there. And you live in Chicago. Been there now for a while. What do you like to do for fun in Chicago?
Chicago's a great city. I enjoy the culture of Chicago. I still live in Hyde Park, so I'm close to the lakefront, and I love being near the lake. I've got a scooter. I've got a recumbent bike. On any given Saturday, you can see me out there on the lake path, scootering way too fast because I got one of those battery operated scooters. That's probably really unsafe, but they've now made them legal in Chicago. Thank you. Or biking to the lake path. We're about a mile from the lake. I love the outdoors, and I love the seasons here. With the exception of one. I'll let you guess which one that is.
Okay. We'll think about that.
The sports scene is great. I'm an avid sports fan. My son and I went to the Bears opener at Soldier Field a couple weeks ago. I can honestly say I've been to every sports venue here, but I still have yet to see the Blackhawks play. That's the only team I've seen the Wolves play, but I haven't seen the Blackhawks play. And I love concerts. My wife and my son and I, we try to do at least a couple of concerts a year, whether it's at Ravinia, whether it's at the United Center. They've got a great outdoor facility at Northerly Island now. We just take a full advantage of those opportunities. And I was telling a student just last week, she asked me what the last concert was, and I thought about it, and I went down and I wrote down all the concerts I've been to. It turns out I've been to 65 concerts, not just here, but over the span of the last 25 or so years.
Whoa.
But I would say probably half of those were here in Chicago.
Yeah.
It's just an amazing place for that.
It's a great place for music. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, Daryl, now that we've kind of humanized you for everybody, and that was really fun. let's roll over and talk about Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine. Should we call it Loyola or should we call it Stritch? What do people call it there?
Well, You can call it either one. Loyola is sort of a name attributed to the Jesuit culture. And so there are lots of Loyolas around the country.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Loyola University in Los Angeles. There's one in New Orleans. There's one in near Baltimore. And everyone wants to know if they're affiliated. Well, they are, but they aren't. They're not the same school. They're not the same institution. We have our main campus in Rogers Park. We have a graduate campus downtown. We have our campus here, the health sciences campus. And I think that most people are comfortable calling us the Stritch School of Medicine. But interestingly enough, there is a Cardinal Stritch University in Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
So you kind of just got to pick whatever is most comfortable for you. I know when the Loyola Ramblers went to the Final Four, Charles Barkley couldn't say Loyola, so he didn't have an option. But I say Loyola University. I say Stritch School of Medicine.
Okay.
Really kind of depends on where I am. If I'm recruiting at a Jesuit campus, I may invoke the entire name.
Okay.
But it's really kind of interchangeable.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad I asked because I'm sure that question comes up quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So, hey, let's start talking a little bit about the curriculum and when you are out doing recruiting and you're speaking with prospective applicants and they want to know about how your medical school curriculum is structured, what are some things that you like people to take away or the main points that you want people to know about the curriculum there?
Well, the main point I try to advocate for is that the curriculums at all medical schools in the United States, 165 to I believe 167, something around that number, allopathic schools, the curricular components are very similar. You
right.
have to have the same competencies because you're trying to prepare students to take the USMLE Step 1 exam and obviously do well, putting themselves in a good position to achieve internships and residencies. So the curricular modalities are often different, how that information is given to the students and whether it's systems-based or whether it's applied in a different way. For us, it typically is established at the first year. Curriculum concentrates on basic science principles. It concentrates on normal structure and function of the human body. It really does have application in behavioral science and communication regarding, medical, clinical interviewing skills and the doctor-patient relationship. We do a great deal with the ethics that we apply in our curriculum. We've got a great bioethics team. So we try to infuse health promotion and disease prevention within that. When we refer to medical ethics, we're referring to that within this context of social and big picture issues, but also diving into our own community context. Mm-hmm. So I like that blend. That's a little bit different than my previous institution with respect to that ethical bend. The second year now will transform into the mechanisms of human disease. So we've gone from the healthy body to the diseased or ill body. And now we've implemented an understanding of pharmacology and therapeutic approaches to disease treatment. We advance the clinical skills, which start off in the first year in a simulated environment using models and mannequins that bleed and breathe to standardize patients. And again, kind of invoking the spirit of our Jesuit foundations to invoke the idea of understanding human life processes. End of life care is far more significant in the second year. You start to understand it not just from the perspective of the mechanisms of human disease, but also the care and compassion that is invoked when you talk to patients who are in that situation for whom life is at an end. So we implement clinical rotations with our chaplains.
Oh, that's
we
cool.
have pastoral care here.
Oh, wow.
So we have that component that is really kind of a strong foundation of our patient-centered medicine curriculum in that second year. So it does invite the opportunity for our students to become really immersed in not just the clinical sort of standard of care, but also that compassionate standard of care, being able to listen to patients and their families to understand, the life that they've lived, the life that they want to leave in terms of the legacy that they left behind. And obviously, I think that has a lot to do with why our students are very successful in residency, because they bring that component of the care model to their care team.
Yeah.
I think that really kind of distinguishes the first 2 years. As for the, third and fourth year, again, the clinical rotations and clerkships are pretty standard. I think the great aspect of those opportunities here is that, as you mentioned, you're in Chicago, you're in the third largest city in the United States. You've got many different hospitals, many different clinics, many different, demographic and, biographical sort of perspectives that can be played out in different environments in the city. You've got rural, you've got urban, you've got suburban. We are kind of on the precipice of all of those different environments, being on the west side, the far west side of the city, kind of between Cook and DuPage County. I don't know how familiar you are with the area, but Cook County is where Chicago resides. It's obviously a very urban county, urban environment. Our students do rotate at Cook County Hospital for some of their rotations, particularly in primary care. We have our own hospital infrastructure, which is very large, several different hospitals and clinics. We actually have the largest inpatient psychiatric facility in the entire state here on our campus. We also have a large VA hospital adjacent to our campus. So our students get a variety of different types of care through which they can rotate, and they can learn about different applications of medical and clinical skills. And then, if they choose to kind of consider rural medicine, you don't really need to go too far to our west to be in a more rural environment. So I think it's a perfect place to kind of cultivate an understanding of population dynamics and really get a strong sense for the type of work you want to do. We have elective time with over 100 different clinical electives for students to choose from. Some of these clinical electives are designed to encourage business and leadership skills, justice and healthcare, disaster preparedness, again, palliative care, end-of-life issues, patient safety, global health, healthcare delivery. Again, we have the bioethics, we have professionalism and communication. Those can be actually more intensive curricular tracks. Bioethics actually has an honors track component to it. Global health has an honors track component to it. I didn't mention, maybe getting ahead of myself, but we also, because we are a Jesuit school, we embark upon missions with our ministry
I wanted
team.
to get to that. Yeah.
So again, a lot of different opportunities within the construct of our curriculum. And again, it's a pass-fail curriculum in the first 2 years, and then clerkships provide an honors high pass-fail.
Okay. Hey, let me go back to the first 2 years when you're talking about how that's structured for students, for medical students. What's the typical week kind of like for them? Is it primarily, are they getting their education through lecture? Are they in lecture all day? Is it half day? Is it small group learning? How's the education delivered?
That's a great question. So we have the didactic lectures. Those have always been a part of our curricular process. We did a few years ago start recording those lectures. So we provide students with the opportunity to be here in class for the lectures. Obviously, it's a benefit to students who maybe live in Chicago who don't want to commute to the West Side at 8 a.m. To watch the lectures at home. There are mandatory lectures, but for the most part, lectures can be viewed at the discretion and leisure of the student. They are compelled twice a week in the first year in particular to attend small group sessions. These are extensions of the courses in which they take. They also work as sort of an advising mechanism, kind of a check-in point. This is where attendance is taken. This is where reviews for tests may take part. This is also where cases are studied. So there's a lot of dimensions in the small group session, which is about 10 students per faculty advisor, that are a little bit more insular, a little bit more guided, and a little bit more intimate than the large lecture hall process.
So a bit of a hybridized kind of, you get lecture, you get some small group interactions, a little more intimate learning environments there.
Right. And then of course, the opportunity to kind of develop we don't have a flipped classroom model here, but we do have students bringing to small group some of their expertise when it comes to some of the cases. And so now you have the ability to dialogue and to be collaborative in that sense. And of course that engages students and helps them form study groups, which again, I think by and large, having this wonderful space, this standalone medical school and a very robust health professions environment gives students a real great opportunity to come here, to immerse themselves in their trade, to immerse themselves in opportunities to work with their peers, to take on shadowing or other clinical exposures with faculty. I've seen lots of first years who come into the building at 5 a.m. so that they can observe a surgery before they go to class at 8.
That's nice.
And so, they can come here and they can really kind of live the life of a healthcare professional.
So the hospital is attached to the med school?
Yes.
They're all one. It's all one. Okay. All right. That's cool.
It's one campus. It's a very large physical plant. We've got our research facilities here. We have our clinics, our cancer care center. We have our main hospital here. We have our VA hospital, our medical school. We have a nursing school. So, it's pretty robust. You can pretty much spend an entire day here and immerse yourself in this. But I think the great thing about it, being a graduate and professional environment, is that students can leave here and they can live their life. They can live in whatever neighborhood they choose. They can kind of.
I was going to ask you, do most students live in? So you said that Maywood is about 12 miles west of downtown. Do most students live in that area, or are they a lot of students living in the downtown area and then commuting out, or is it just a big mix?
Yeah, I think it's more common for first and second years to live approximate to campus. So there are lots of different communities here. There's, Oak Park, I think, is probably the most well-known. That's where, Ernest Hemingway and, the Roby House, the Roby construction models are prevalent. So Oak Park is probably 3-4 miles from campus. There's Forest Park, which is the neighborhood adjacent to that. Those tend to be very popular for students because they're very busy, dynamic communities with lots of new construction and condominiums. And, there are other universities that are in that range. So a very active lifestyle, particularly for the younger set. But you also have some kind of bedroom communities, I call them, like Riverside, North Riverside, Berwyn. Those are communities that students choose to live in as well. And they're approximate, but just on the other side of campus.
Okay.
But when you get into your third and fourth year, you're rotating, you're doing your clerkships, as I said, there are lots of affiliate hospitals here in the city. So you could you could live anywhere and get to where you need to go pretty easily. It's not that necessary to have a car here. We've got great public transit, but obviously, I love driving. I have a car. I could take the blue line here if I wanted to, but then, I would have to, from where I live, I'd have to take the Metro to the blue line to the Pace bus station to get here, so for me, it's kind of easier to drive. But, if you put it in your mind that was going to be your plan, then yeah, you could definitely make it work. And living in the city, obviously, I think is, there's lots of different neighborhoods,
sure,
especially for young people that are interested in living in the hipster neighborhood or, the more eclectic set of neighborhoods, or, based on your affinity group or your interest. There's a lot to choose from here.
We're talking about the first 2 years, frequent question that we get, and I'm sure you get it too when we're out and about doing recruiting and meeting prospective applicants is, well, how early will I get to start seeing patients and working with them? So how does that work at Stritch?
Well, you do need to be certified to work with patients. And obviously that's where the STEP exam comes in. You're typically processed to be on a patient care team by virtue of the academic knowledge foundation that you build. And ultimately in the orientation process, we do provide basic life support certification. So, obviously there are students who have a range of different backgrounds and skills and credentials and licensures when they enter medical school. So everyone is baseline at BLS, providing them with the opportunity to do whatever baseline activities there are. But certainly if you have an EMT license, you could do more. But within the scope of our own hospital infrastructure, we try not to have students working on patient care teams until they have gone into third year. So we do have affiliate clinics. We have an access to care clinic, which is right up here off of Roosevelt Road, just across the main road from our campus. We have affiliations with 3 or 4 other clinics in the city of Chicago. New Life Volunteering Society, Chicago Health Clinic. Those are affiliated through student organizations. So if you're a student and you wish to be a part of that student organization, for example, for CHC, then you could train. It's an infrastructure that is run by students. So attending physicians, quote unquote, within that structure would be your 4th year students who have already received their license, who are, pretty much on the road towards internships. They kind of provide the leadership within that model. There's obviously an attending physician present at the clinics when you do decide you're going to rotate there, but that rotation does have a sort of hierarchy.
Sure.
And so, if you're a 2nd or 1st year student, then obviously you can participate. You can get a good degree of interaction with patients, whether it be interviewing, whether it be doing simple diagnostics. There are lots of things. If you're a phlebotomist and you have that licensure coming into medical school, then you could definitely do that at the clinic. There's pharmaceutical dispensing as well. So if you have that background and knowledge, then you can participate in that as well. So it does give students who have a little bit more skill and a little bit more ability the opportunity to use that skill and use those abilities in that environment. But for anyone that might be a little bit more novice, they're definitely going to be in an environment where they engage with patients. And so again, you have to consider the safety of that environment.
Yeah.
I know that there are schools that, like I said, we baseline at BLS, but I know that there are some schools that provide training for the EMT license for their first years, because that will give them a lot more opportunities when they do go into those clinic environments. But again, I think for the most part, there has to be some safeguarding
some
from the
lines.
Hospital's perspective before you just allow students to go roaming through the corridors.
Let me ask you, Daryl, about another common question we receive, and that's research opportunities. So students that are interested in research, I read something, I was doing some research. There's the STAR program at Stritch. Is that the main vehicle for students doing research at Stritch, or is it woven into the curriculum? How does that work?
If you decide to do a STAR project, then you are given the opportunity at the end of the first half of your first year to apply for a position. There are paid positions in STAR, which will fund students, meaning that they will be paid for their work as researchers during the first 6 to 8 weeks of summer. Mm-hmm. After their first year. That project could lead to a more sustainable project if the student chooses to do that, or could lead to another project that they can do with the guidance of a PI who's been assigned to them. So that's sort of like the introduction to research, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
There are obviously also students who have research backgrounds who come into the medical school who are very proactive and will seek out different opportunities. I talked to a student a couple of weeks ago who kind of fits that mold, came in with a good deal of research experience and had publications and pretty much knew the type of research that she wanted to be a part of. And we have a very strong translational research team here, and that's where her focus has been targeted. So she was able to get in touch with a PI and start talking and dialoguing about a project, and is going to actually start doing that soon, within the next month or two, kind of waiting for the first course MCPG to end. And that kind of, allows a little bit of time for first years before anatomy starts up. Obviously, if you're really well-versed in physiology and anatomy, then you could probably take on that opportunity. It wouldn't be a burden to you. I think students have to be careful about the things that they decide to jump into before the timing allows them to. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why we try to regulate it. There are some schools that encourage students to have an applied research project as a compulsory part of their graduation requirements. We do not do that. We do give students the opportunity to develop their own projects in a number of different ways. We have, as I mentioned, the STAR program, which can initiate research opportunities. We have bioethics, which is an opportunity to extend research in a bioethical perspective. There is global health, which also can spur research within that realm. We do have a research track. So if you do go into STAR and you want to extend the opportunity to conduct research moving forward, you can go into the research honors track, and you could compel a project. You could compel a fellowship year, which would be granted to you after your third year, which would extend your program, but give you a full year to develop and implement your research. Mm-hmm. We also obviously have an MD PhD program. So we have 3 to 5 spots a year.
Yeah, I was going to ask how many.
That we have students participating in the MD PhD process. So they typically do 2 years, take their step exam, and then disembark to conduct their research, sometimes 6 years, 5 years, 3 years. And then they come back into program. They do kind of a 1 month clinical skills kind of refresher course, and then they go back into the program as third years, do their clinical rotations, and then into their fourth year. So
yeah, that's good to know, because I know a lot of students, and you probably see them too, that they have a research bend, and so they frequently want to know, how can I continue research as a medical student? So it sounds like their opportunities are there. It's kind of flexible. You can take it in the different directions that you want to go in there.
Absolutely. Like I said, I think that there are many schools that encourage research, and when students ask me the benefit of research as a medical student, I often tell them that it just improves. Well, I mean, there's lots of benefits, but I think ultimately it does improve your opportunities to be fully available and fully selective in terms of your opportunities for specialty. Because if you don't have research in some specialty areas, you are going to be less compelling as a candidate.
Sure, you're not. I think they look. Some residencies look for contributions to the scholarly work of that specialty. Yeah,
Exactly.
I've heard that too. Yep. What about? Let's talk, Daryl, about you. We were touching on this a little bit ago. We started nibbling at it, but the service availabilities and the I don't know if you're referring to the Ignatian service immersion. Is that what we're starting to touch on when the trips that some students can take?
Right. So, we have a ministry team here on campus. That's another unique feature of our campus. And ministry does a number of great things here. They obviously provide programming to help students understand that faith is part of the practice or can be part of the practice. Again, it's not incumbent upon every student to be part of that culture, but we do provide it as an opportunity for all students to consider. And we have students from a number of different religious backgrounds on campus who participate in the life of our campus through our ministry efforts. But one of them, which is tied to global health, is our Ignatian Service Immersion Program, which is about 25 years old. It involves students being able to select and apply for different immersion experiences in different parts of the world. Where we have ongoing service missions through Catholic charity organizations, through university programs within those sites. So, for example, a student who is interested in attending a mission in a Spanish-speaking country because they have Spanish language background could identify a particular rotation in Bolivia or Belize, for example, or Peru. And they can apply for that position at basically the same time that we have the STAR program application, we have the ISI application. So really what you're doing at that point is you're saying to students in the first year, here are a couple of tracks for you to consider in your summer break. You can consider the research track, or you can consider the global health track. Mm-hmm. And that typically takes care of about 90% of our students either doing one of those things or the other. So the ISI trips disembark early part of the summer, usually around mid-May, or about 6 weeks. And they go to the various sites. Some of those sites are sites that have a great deal of clinical work done with rural populations, with populations that are particularly vulnerable. In some countries, the population dynamics are such that certain members of the populace don't have access to healthcare. Some countries do discriminate against individuals within their society. We've seen some countries who withhold certain procedures for women. So there are opportunities to be a part of the clinical missions. We have other missions where we have students working to build safer communities by virtue of helping with water purification processes, or building homes, sort of like the Habitat for Humanity structure. So there are some sites that are more work related than clinically related, but in essence, they're all facilitated by virtue of the same process, which is bringing community, university partnership, and Catholic charity organizations together to sustain these missions. So these missions are ongoing. We are merely coming in at a point where we embark upon the experience that others have been having for the entire year.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to see how a sustained mission works and what sustains it ultimately. And I think it's fascinating. I myself have not been on an ISI trip because admissions is a 13-month process. So we just don't have any kind of break in the summer.
Right.
But that's one of the things I hope to do at some point.
I'll put a link to this site on the show page, and I'm looking at the destinations are really incredible. I mean, from the U.S.-Mexico border to South Dakota to Israel and Dominican and Bolivia. I mean, really some amazing outreach opportunities. So that I'm glad I asked about that and that you talked about it, because that's a really that looks really cool. So, what about, just to kind of wrap up the curricular things a little bit here, Daryl, is there anything that when you're going to talk to prospective students that you feel like you need to dispel, like a myth about Stritch, or like they heard some misconceptions about your school that you need to, that you feel like you're like, no, that's not us at all. Like this is who we are.
That's an interesting question. I often hear the question about Catholicism. I believe that, being one of 4 Jesuit schools, medical schools in the country, there's this notion that you have to be Catholic to attend. And obviously that is not true. We have no way of having any kind of data element come into the system that would,
I'm glad he said that,
understand what your religious practice or your religious beliefs are. But often students will tell us in their supplemental applications about their faith. We actually have a question that is parsed to help us understand the faith practice of the individual without trying to suggest that it's a Catholic faith process. We actually utilize the idea of our mantra about, being a person for others, and how that has emboldened you in your desire to become a physician. So that's really how we kind of open the door for that dialogue to happen. Obviously, if you are really compelled by your faith and you're really compelled by your religious beliefs to go into medicine or to be a servant to others, then obviously it will come through in that statement. If it's a little bit less about faith and a little bit more about just service to humanity, a little bit more about the interest you have in science, a little bit more about the interest you have and just being someone who can infuse both science and humanity and the desire to help others into your kind of story or foundational motivation, and that'll play too. But ultimately, that's how we get at an understanding of that. And I wouldn't say that it's the kind of thing that we could have put a check mark by if we know that you're Catholic. But I did mention that we do recruit pretty broadly, and we do recruit with our Jesuit partnerships in mind. So, we have a strategy in our recruitment process where we try to visit every Jesuit undergraduate campus once every 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And that's something that I came in with the idea to help us kind of keep our mission alive, right? Our mission suggests that we are very much aligned with many of the things that Jesuit, undergraduate programs instill upon their students. This idea of service, this idea of being a person for others, this idea of being reflective, having a reflective nature, being able to understand and realize your growth process, realize how you have transformed personally from the start of your academic program to the end. Or if there's, an experience like ISI, for example, that you've embarked upon, how has that changed you? How has that transformed you in any sort of way? So being able to develop a real reflective practice should in turn help you be a more sustained servant to others. And, if that's something that you can cultivate early and you can sustain throughout medical school, it'll likely stay with you beyond. And, with the high rate of physician burnout that's out there, we have to kind of look at our mission and our resources as trying to assist in this sort of national epidemic that exists out there. So what can we provide as an institution that might be a little bit different than others? I feel like that's kind of it, so we give ourselves pretty much a little bit of a leg up if we know that the student coming in has started to cultivate these behaviors, started to cultivate these practices within their own worldview, and can, utilize them here and actually find a safe and productive way of extending those opportunities and using them as part of their clinical practice.
Well, I think this is now taking us a nice segue into the screening process. And so we've up to this point in our other episodes talked to schools that were very mission driven, and you're not only mission driven, but you have this set of Jesuit values that you're keeping in mind as what sounds like you're going through your screening process. So Daryl, can you kind of take us through how you evaluate applicants? You kind of touched on that a minute ago. As you were talking about the global outreach and those Ignatian service opportunities. So what people always want to know, what are you looking for? What do you want out of me? How do people get into your school?
Well, as I said, we're mission driven, and our mission invokes the idea of Jesuit values. And again, you don't have to be a Jesuit. As a matter of fact, I say to students, we have 68%, actually 62% of our first year students are female. 65% of our second year students are female. So the idea that they come in as Jesuits is not realistic because, for the most part, you can only be a Jesuit priest if you're a male. So that's ultimately the first part of the misnomer, is that, we're not looking for men of the cloth. Now, we do have students here who have theology backgrounds, who wish to be priests. But the goal here is to use the sort of understanding of Jesuit values to break them down carefully so that students can understand. So when they're writing about how they align with our mission, they can understand it from the perspective of these separate components of what Jesuit values really mean. So care for the whole person, not just for humanity's sake, not just for, the community in which you're in, but also for yourself. So do you have self-care practices? Do you have, again, reflective practices to help you sustain through difficult times? Education in the service of social justice. So we have a very large degree of interest in how a candidate has worked to understand their perspective in areas of social justice. Have they ever found a cause to get behind? Have they ever felt that a cause needs to be supported? And then how have they committed to that support? Have they committed to service in any way in that regard? So those are fundamentally at the core of what we look for. We also obviously need to know that students are academically prepared to be good physicians, because they have to go through a very rigorous process of training. They have to go through a licensure process. It's a very expensive proposition to go into medical school. So we want to know that students can academically succeed. So we look at a number of different areas to sort of get a sense for that. We have developed a holistic review process. So since I've been here, and that's one of the things that I benefited from at the University of Chicago, is learning about holistic review, learning how to implement that within the process of your admission structure. Bringing that here was, I think, an epiphany and has transformed us,
Yeah.
So again, when you kind of consider what does that mean? So looking at a holistic review means you're looking at all the different data points pertinent to the candidate's file. You obviously have a way to capture that data and to measure it or reflect upon it and understand it in sort of context of all the other candidates that you have. So we've kind of boiled it down to some of the probably 8 different realms that we really do kind of focus on. Obviously, grades, your science GPA, your total GPA, grade trends in particular. How have you trended up into medical school? So, the trend line should be accelerating towards medical school. It shouldn't be decelerating. It shouldn't be going down. It shouldn't be struggling going into medical school, because that doesn't present the best opportunity for success. Looking at your academic rigor, the programs that you've undergone to prepare yourself. Obviously, looking at the MCAT in combination with the entire academic record, looking at the number of takes, kind of getting a sense for their comfort zone when it comes to test taking.
Darryl, let me ask you. You just hit something there. You said number of takes of the MCAT. What's a number that starts to make you a little nervous when it comes to the number of attempts at an MCAT?
Well, I think it depends on the duration of time in which the test is taken. If you've taken the exam 3 times in a year, that's a concern. But that same 3 times would not be as much of a concern if it was over 3 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, it's hard to say what the actual real significant number is. It just really depends on, the proximity of these tests clustered around one another, because there tends to be more evidence of anxiety around tests. If you're taking 3 exams a year and your score doesn't change, it just represents,
your plateau,
poor planning on your part in terms of how you're preparing for these exams, and really just kind of a window into the anxious nature of your own test taking strategies. So again, I think it just depends on the elongated sort of perspective of how that candidate has prepared for medical school. But again, I don't want to just focus on the academic things, because within the holistic realm, we are looking at personal development as well. We're looking at these issues of self-awareness, maturity. Again, as I mentioned, compassion and care for others, motivation for medicine. We're looking at service. And again, we try to, quantify that in certain ways within our system. We don't have benchmarks. We don't have what I would say cutoffs in terms of that quantification of service, but I can easily look at 2 students who are similarly built in terms of academics, and then I can look at service and I can quantify that, and I could say, well, this person has more service than the other. Maybe this student is a little bit more prepared to be in this environment. So again, the sustainability of those commitments, and again, whether or not those experiences have delved into the realm of working with those who are on the margins of society, I think is important. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Healthcare exposure, interpersonal excellence, leadership, research skills, again, kind of understanding how they've taken the science that they've learned in the coursework or in the classroom and how they've applied that in a way to, again, kind of better others' experiences and to promote scholarly knowledge. So those are the areas I think that we kind of really focus on in our holistic review process.
How does the screening process work? I was reading, you had a nice way you described it online. And so is every application reviewed by one person or 2 people, or in that, it sounds like it moves up then like through it's passed on to an executive committee kind of thing. Am I capturing that correctly?
Right. So we have a review committee which will review every candidate's file, initially 1 review per candidate. And then if it passes a certain threshold in terms of our rubric process, then it will receive a second review. Once the second review has been completed, we have within our scope of holistic review a quantitative perspective on that review, and we have a threshold for success. So once the threshold for success has been met in Congress with all those others who have met that threshold of success, we select our interview pool. So, the challenge is going from what we have, which is a very large number of applications. Those that complete about 10 to 11,000 completed applications.
Gosh,
we may have probably in the realm of 4,000 to 5,000 of those that are reasonable to consider. So we then have to kind of look at how they measure up against one another. We have to look at other factors, as I mentioned, some of the quantified details regarding service, again, looking at fit. We do also put into mind there some reference to the interest the candidate may have for us. We do allow candidates to support their applications with updates throughout the process.
That's good
we
to know.
allow them to have external advocacy. We allow them to provide different ways that we can either measure or quantify interest. So, and we don't advertise that. This is probably the closest we'll ever come to that. But that helps us understand who is more likely to accept an offer if given an interview. Again, when you have 5,000 candidates that are going to hit the threshold, you really are looking for the 700 that are most likely to attend if given an offer.
Yeah.
That's tough. But again, it's relative to where we've recruited, where we've been, who has advocated for those candidates. Has it been, advisors from campuses we visited? Has it been alum of our institution? If a student just comes to us off the street, that's fine. But, if they're really interested in us, there's a way that they can provide levels of us understanding what that interest is. So again, that's really how we get to the interview pool.
Yeah.
And from the interview pool, we have a process where we bring them in, and then we have another process, which is sort of quality control, looking at the interviewers' reports, looking at the reviewers' evaluations, looking to see if there are any discrepancies among those areas, looking to see if there's anything we may have missed in terms of any information from the letters or whatever. And then we bring all those different dynamics and metrics to our executive committee, which will ratify the pool and accept candidates or hold them for continued consideration, which will eventually yield a wait list.
What about the interview day? Let's talk about that a little bit, about what can a candidate, so you're one of the lucky 600 or 700 people to get pulled out of that enormous pool to be invited to come to interview there. What's the interview day like? How's it get kind of set up and started off?
Well, it's a full day. We invite candidates here at 8:30. We open the doors for them. They come in, they have a light breakfast. We have a video showing different aspects of our program. We have some of our instructors speaking on behalf of their experience. A lot of our instructors were students here at the School of Medicine. So it's nice to have that sort of community feel. And I think they immediately get that because, like I said, this is a self-appointed medical school, which means it is singularly the medical school, singularly for medical school students. So they'll be coming into a hospital, they'll be parking in a hospital garage. They may go through, a clinical environment, but when they open the doors to the medical school, they see a very different perspective. They see, students who are enjoying each other and talking and, being young people and having those dialogues. And so I think it does kind of transform a little bit for them. We start off with a couple of different exercises to sort of ground them, to help them understand that they're in the right place. There was no mistake made for their invitation. We kind of set up the interview day for them and provide some financial aid information. And then we have two tracks. Typically, the first track will start their interviews at 10, and then they'll have a subsequent interview thereafter. And then everyone has lunch at noon. The second track will kind of flip the order, and then they'll have their interviews after lunch. So in the time when you're not having lunch, you're either sitting in on a class, you're getting some programming information from one of our departments, whether it's global health or ministry or bioethics. And then you're taking a tour. The tour is guided by one of our students or two of our students. They're kind of giving you a tour of the entire campus, including the research facilities, including the hospital. They're talking to you about their own experience, why they chose Stritch, talking about their daily life activities, where they live, what they do for fun, that kind of stuff. So, And then we bring them all back here to wrap things up and give them ice cream. Even in winter, you'd be surprised. Yes, it is a thing. So yeah, I think our interview day is pretty good. Obviously we get lots of good positive feedback, because everything is really kind of is formed here. All the interactions are from our students and our faculty, and even the food that they eat is from our food service provider, and this was really good, healthy food. So like everything is like about what you will experience when you're here. Nothing is brought from the outside.
They get 2 interviews on the interview day. Are there any differences between the 2? Like
there
one
are
open file, one half, like partial file.
Right. So one is a full file, which includes the letters, the transcript, includes everything that the candidate has provided. The other is a partial file where we intentionally take out the transcript, we take out the letters, we take out all the dynamics of understanding about coursework and testing. We just want that interviewer to have the candidate's own perspective, their experiences as they've written them into the AMCAS application, their supplemental responses as they've written them into their application, just a demographic and backgrounder. And that's pretty much it. Both interviewers also receive the assessments from reviewers. So they are given the 15 different rubrics, the 15 different domains within the rubric, plus any comments or questions that have come from the reviewers.
So is there anything that when you're advising students and they say, hey, I have an interview coming up at your school, do you have any tips for me? Do you give them anything in particular to prepare for on how to approach their day at Loyola?
No, just practical advice, show up on time, be well dressed, be well rested.
Yeah.
I think those are probably the most important things to consider. Obviously, if you're not from Chicago and you interview in the middle of winter, dress appropriately. There's nothing worse than seeing a student who is not dressed for cold weather, experiencing snow for the first time.
Yep.
I emphasize well rested too, because there's nothing worse than seeing a student kind of falling asleep during an interview day. I mean, it's intentionally long. It's from 8:30 until about 3:30. I mean, that's a long day, and you're constantly on the entire time. Even if you're not, being observed, you're being observed. You're constantly being observed.
I've seen that.
Yeah. I mean, you can't really assume that no one is observing your behavior or observing how you are, your affect with others. So even when you're engaging in conversation with, the other interviewees, like, don't be inappropriate, be professional the entire time. That's what you want to project. That's what you want people to see you as. You want to, have that perception be that you are ready for the professional craft that you're being invited to. It's an invitation.
You've seen the students kind of nodding off too, and it's not due to boring presentations. I don't think it's just
lack of rest. I mean, lots of candidates are taking, they're getting off work and getting on a plane and flying halfway across the country to get here. And, it's an early start. I don't blame them. I'm not a great early riser. I'm not a morning person, but certainly I want to impress upon, your audience, the idea that, it is important. I mean, and this is the same for residency. It's actually more higher stakes because, you've already invested the time and the money into medical school. When you're going to your residency interviews, you don't want to go to your residency interviews falling asleep. You don't want to go to your residency interviews dressed inappropriately. This is all about starting your professional formation from day one, right? Yeah. And this is how we see you. This is, and this is the impression that you make.
I feel, sorry to interrupt you. I feel like when we're giving like presentations or something and interview tips, and I will frequently tell my audience that if you feel like you're kind of nodding off, like you're getting heavy eyelids, quietly excuse yourself and, try to step out, go to the bathroom, splash a little water in her face, do something to kind of, because like you said, Daryl, like we can see you. We can see you starting to fall asleep and people are watching that stuff. And so we get it. It happens. But if you start to feel that happen, I think it's better for you to get up and kind of try to excuse yourself or get something to drink.
Right.
And then, come back and then quietly, bring yourself back in the room versus, totally nodding off. And I've seen applicants looking at those students going like, oh boy, like can see this happening. And you feel like, oh no, like wake up.
Yeah, we have coffee out all day, so there's no excuse. And there's nothing worse than being caught napping during the checkout process, because we intentionally bring them back so we can kind of catch up and check in with them. And that's where I've seen it. The day has gotten to them.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think we've tried to touch on a little bit of everything here, Daryl, about Loyola. Is there anything that you felt that we need to kind of come back to, or that when you and I were setting this up to talk today, that you wanted to make sure we got across to the listeners about your medical school?
Well, it's a competitive process. I mean, I won't lie about that. 2 years ago, we had more applications in our pool than any other medical school in the country.
Wow.
I don't know we had 14,950, I believe, last cycle. I don't know where that ranks in terms of total applications, but I would assume it's very close to the top.
Yeah.
We're trending pretty highly this year. We've already received over 12,500. So,
oh my gosh.
That's what I would say. It's very competitive. And there are no absolutes in this. The thing I would just suggest is that you have to, with any school you apply to, you just really have to know the school, and you have to really understand the mission of the school. And you really, if you're going to commit to the interview, which I wholeheartedly hope that all candidates who receive invites to interview do, commit to the interview, and really don't try to sell yourself, but just try to take the opportunity to understand how that environment can be a positive environment for you to conduct your training. This is not about trying to impress. This is really about trying to understand and find a unique match. So I think that's ultimately what I would say. This is not business school.
This is high stakes medical education.
Right.
Well, good. Well, hey, let's switch gears and kind of wrap things up by taking some listener questions that we've received, and you and I are just going to kind of have a little conversation about them. So,
all right. I think my earbuds are starting to fail me, so hopefully they'll have enough juice left to get through this.
Okay. So we'll get through them here. So first one here is from Gia, who goes to University of Arizona, and she wants to know. She says, "I'm a senior neuroscience major, and I'm currently trying to decide if I need a post-bacc program or a master's program to improve my chances of getting into medical school. What's the difference between those two?" And that's
a post-bacc. Oh, are you going to answer this question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I see a post-bacc program as being one that extends, first of all, it extends the undergraduate core. So it does not come across through AMCAS as a master's program. It doesn't provide a differentiation between your undergraduate core and any graduate work. It is really just an add-on to undergrad. So you have to understand that any core credits within that program are just going to be lumped into your undergraduate GPA. So it really is an extension of the undergraduate GPA.
So sometimes post-baccs are for career changers. If you didn't take the sciences as an undergrad.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you're art major.
It's right. So in that sense, it is going to now provide a baseline BCPM. Okay. And, obviously, what we try to do is we try to anticipate this. We only require 30 credits of science coursework to be considered as an eligible candidate, knowing that this may happen. But obviously that candidate is competing with students who have, master's degrees in science programs and have been science majors. So if we consider that, they might have 160 credits of science. They may have a much larger perspective of science coursework that we can evaluate and see as comparable to test outcomes or as comparable to research than the person who might have the 30. But again, I think that's the unique difference. A master's program is going to provide a differentiation of trend. It's going to say, okay, here was my undergraduate trend. This is what I did. Now that I'm in this master's program, this is what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
So it will likely accelerate the trend. It will likely show improvement towards medical school. And again, that's the thing that I think tends to differentiate the two. Although, you can look at either one and say, and you can dive into it and say, okay, yeah, the post-bacc program provided 24 credits of acceleration, and this is how it differentiates from the undergraduate core. But the other component to the master's program, obviously, is that it is for a degree. It is typically in line with some research or thesis, which again provides some connection to scholarly pathways into medicine potentially, right?
Yeah. So, one thing I wanted to mention about that, I think Gia should be talking to her pre-med advisor there at Arizona too, because I've met students, you may not need one of these programs. If she's a neuroscience major, she's not going to do a post-bacc program because that's just going to give her general chemistries and organic chemistries. And I've met some students, I'm like, your GPA is fine. You don't need to go do a master's. It would appear that based on what we're seeing here is you could be academically viable as a medical student. You don't need to go spend another $80,000 on a master's unless you want that as a part of an educational goal. You may not need that.
Right. But for me, the subtext of this question is I'm a neuroscience major and I probably didn't do as well as I wanted to.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I think that's the subtext, and, I could be wrong, but I think that anyone that's considering, both of these outcomes is probably in that boat where they're saying, maybe I'm not as competitive of a candidate because, maybe I got a C here or I had a couple C's here. So, from that perspective, I would say, it is an opportunity to consider whether you want to, just kind of, disembark from that path. Again, if you're a neuroscience major, how much science is actually going to influence your undergraduate GPA? Is 24 credits going to be enough? Versus the master's program where you can actually just step aside from your undergraduate GPA and then create a new line, a new trend that can differentiate from that. And then you can say, well, now I'm more mature. Now I have a stronger focus to get towards medical school. This is the difference between 4 years of being a neuroscience major at Arizona and the last year post-grad, where I've had a lot of focus and I've made my case for wanting this. And so, I can see that.
Yeah. So the master's GPA, so people understand this is a separate line item. It's not all lumped in with a cumulative GPA that has everything. It's undergraduate GPA cumulative. And then if you do master's work, then it's a separate, or graduate work, it's a separate line item. So there's not one overall cumulative GPA for an academic history.
Correct. And you could theorize again that the post-bacc would be, if you've gone through a 4-year degree program, then the post-bacc would be like the 5th year.
Yeah.
Right? So it's averaged in just like any other year. But again, we can see it as the 5th year. Yeah. We can distinguish it, but again, that's the big difference, I think.
Hey, how about the next question?
All right. So Chris from Rutgers is asking, how do medical schools consider special master's program GPAs in the admissions process? So, the idea of a special master's program, that's actually something I know a couple of schools have done. I know Georgetown has a special master's program. So for us, we have an affiliation with Georgetown because they are a Jesuit school, and they actually do a really good job of advocating for their special master's program students. We don't have a linkage with them. We don't have anything of that nature, but I do believe that a lot of these special master's programs do have linkage programs with medical schools. I also believe that to be the case for some post-bacc programs as well. I think the special master's programs tend to be again focused on the master's degree, focused on enrichment through a core curriculum, focused on the degree. But what makes them the special master's program is that they're going to provide you sort of the underbelly of of preparation that is necessary for you to succeed as a medical school candidate. So they're going to provide you with an advising instrument. They're going to provide you with a clinical exposure instrument. They're going to provide you with some preparation towards your application. So I think that, and then of course, some of them will have affiliation agreements or will have linkage agreements with medical schools, so they can kind of pipeline you into those application pools. And in some cases, those application pools will waive the MCAT, for example.
Yeah.
So again, there are some unique qualities about these programs. They're not all the same. So I would definitely consider what the differences are among the schools that you're considering. But as far as the GPA goes for a special master's program, it is looked upon the same way as any master's degree program would be looked upon. The benefit of the special master's program is not necessarily in how the GPA looks, but in all the other programming that they've provided you as a candidate.
The amenities.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, how about, I'll ask the next question here is from Yu Ling from University of Washington. And she says, I'm in a master's program right now, and I'm not sure if I should apply to medical school now or wait until I finish the program. What do you and your admissions guests recommend? So it sounds like she just started. Should she apply now?
Well, again, it's really important to understand why Yuling has taken on the master's program. I mean, if it's a grade enhancer, then those grades aren't going to be realized if she's applying concurrently with the program. So it really has no effect. If her intention was to go into the master's program as a grade enhancer, then you have to let that play out before you apply. It just really depends on the motivation of the student to take on the master's program. Sure, it might be, a public health degree. Okay, so if it's a public health degree, which will not have a lot of science core to it, then maybe it's not such a big departure to apply concurrently with that.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it might actually be an enhancement, because now what you're doing during your applicant year is you're learning something new. You're learning a sort of a new discipline. You're taking on a discipline that will probably enhance your medical school experience. So in that sense, if it's an MPH, for example, I would say, yeah, that'd be fine. But if it's a Master's of Science program, I would say wait.
Yeah, I see that every year, and I can tell that I'm like, I want to say, oh, you're spending all this money, and you can't. December's too late to send us transcripts to show us your performance in this. So I always say wait. You're making a big investment financially, emotionally, time wise. Make it work for you. Wait to apply until you're done. Exactly. You can say, all right, here's what I did, and I crushed it. So,
yeah, I agree. I also think that sometimes, depending on the student, the gap year or growth year, if you want to call it that will occur after the program completes, and while they're applying to medical school, could be a financial burden. That is in some cases what students have told me. There are also other students who tell me that. Candidates who tell me that their parents aren't going to provide them with living expenses or basically encouraging them to do this and paying for it. So yeah, I think every situation has a unique story.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, how about the last one here? I have for you, Daryl.
Okay, so this is from Abhishek from Penn State. Yeah. Okay, he says that. I'm a rising senior and my GPA is a 3.3. It was a 3.45, but I did poorly last semester. What is your recommendation for me to improve my GPA with or without a formal post-bacc? Well, yeah, that's an interesting question, because I do see that particularly with students from California, because the programs out there are a little bit more challenging to get into. So there is often this sort of informal post-bacc that candidates put together for themselves. And remember, again, as I said, a post-bacc is typically anything that is postgraduate work. So, post-bacc credits could be any course you take after you graduated from undergrad that is not part of a formal master's program or degree granting program.
It's like a la carte.
Right, exactly. So, that's an interesting question. It's hard to know what that would look like depending on the number of credits you have. I mean, again, is 24 or 30 credits enough to bolster your undergraduate GPA? I mean, it's dependent on, obviously that 3.45 is higher than the total GPA. So it has to be a little bit, actually, I guess it was a 3.45 and then it dipped to a 3.3. So, so, I think that has to be, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. It's harder to know. It's harder to know without knowing how many credits they have. I mean, but theoretically, I would say that, there really isn't a number per se. I think you have to kind of focus on improvement in the small sort of connective tissue between that coursework and that MCAT, because the MCAT has a chance at that point to maybe dispel some of the maybe the other considerations about what that GPA may or may not say about you. Right.
I agree. I mean, I think for one, Abhishek should finish off his senior year strong and apply after he graduates and see how things look. And then do some math to see, like you said, will 24 credits move the needle in a way that's like worth the money and time to do it? And like you said, the MCAT could become an even greater, a higher stakes exam for him, because if he blows it out of the water, that might make a difference in a future application for him. So, hey, Daryl, this has been great. I think we should probably start to wind things down here. I want to thank you again for coming on. You've had great insight and really provided us a ton of information about Stritch. I think that I found certainly very interesting, especially the value-based and the mission-driven piece of the institution. So this has been so much fun. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on, Christian. I do appreciate the opportunity to, as you mentioned earlier, provide a sort of audio MSAR for your audience. I think it's important to try to dispel any kind of misnomers or, maybe some misinformation that might be out there about medical schools or about medical school applications. I would also suggest that taking part in visiting campuses is a very important opportunity for you to do that as well. We have Stritch visits, which are very nicely a part of our admissions page on our website. You can actually schedule a visit through our website by looking at the various dates that we have for Stritch visits, which provide about a 1-hour orientation about our program and then provide a little Q&A with students and then a tour of our campus. And then as far as the preparation for application, I just want to give a nod to our Aspire program, which is a program that we have each summer in June. We provide 1-week modules that will help students or candidates prepare for the upcoming AMCAS application. So we typically ask any candidate who's preparing to apply the following July, to come into that
that's cool.
Cycle in June, go through ABC, which is our applicant boot camp through Aspire, and then be ready to submit that application once they've completed that week. So I just want to give a nod to both of those different opportunities, and they're available on our website, and I'm sure in your show notes you'll have the information.
Yeah, I'll put those links on the show site, so that'll be great. Hey, Daryl, thank you so much. I hope to see you around here soon.
Thank you very much, Christian. I enjoyed this. It was great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, man. See ya. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.